Artificial intelligence has been a hot topic for investors over the last year, sparked by the launch of ChatGPT in late 2022. The focus has been primarily on technology companies, with many tech-related AI stocks appreciating significantly. But is AI more than just a tech story? We'll break it down right here on UBS Trending. Hi, everyone, and welcome to UBS Trending. I'm your host, Nadia Lovell, filling in for Anthony. Nathaniel Gabriel, CIO's Industrial and Materials Equity Strategist, is in the studio to share two things most important about AI changing the landscape for industrial companies. Nathaniel, when most people think about AI infrastructure, minds likely go to semiconductors and the graphic processing units that are being used to power AI tools. Now, of course, GPUs are important and foundational, but there are other companies that are playing key roles along the supply chain and in the build out of data centers that are housed in thousands of servers that are stacked in a row. What are industrials' role in the build out of data centers?
Definitely, Nadia. Thank you so much for having me. I would really put it in two buckets here. One is really how industrial companies are using AI in their day-to-day operations. I'm sure we can talk more about that. But to get at the root of your question, these are all also providing critical equipment for the build out of the data center itself. Those GPUs are critically important, but the bill of materials for a data center is very complex and often tailored very specifically to some of the largest customers in the world. And so, we're really talking about getting the power from the grid into the facility, stepping down the voltage, getting the voltage to all the various chips, whisking away the heat that's generated from those chips. That's the core of how these companies tend to participate, but there's also the more mundane aspects of things like security and access control, power cabling, and fire suppression as well. So, really helps along the whole electrical equipment value chain.
Thank you so much for that, Nathaniel. Now, GPUs, as we know, contains billions of small transistors. From my days in physics and my electronics class, I know that as electricity passes through, they do generate quite a bit of heat. In fact, over 40% of a data center's power is actually used for cooling. So tell us how and what type of industrial companies are really helping in this airflow management to help cool the data centers.
Yeah, absolutely. Data centers are very power hungry to begin with, but once you factor in the GPU type data centers needed for AI, it becomes significantly more so. One kind of rule of thumb that we look at in the industry when it comes to cooling is that for sort of a standard traditional 100 megawatt data center, you need 30,000 tons of cooling. To put that in perspective, that's like melting 30,000 tons of ice per day. When we're talking about the data centers that are used for Gen AI, that's more like 300 to 500 megawatts. So, really critical to keep that air in the facility at just the right temperature and also the right humidity to facilitate optimal performance and minimize downtime. And so that's part of the equation. And the other part is really that we need to get the heat out of those server racks. And so, traditionally, you could have a heat sink in the server rack. You would blow air over the heat sink, and that would be enough to get the heat out. But as you increase these power densities at the server rack, you need more innovative and forward-thinking solutions. So liquid cooling is an area that's been getting a lot of attention lately, where you're pumping fluid to the surface of the chip and pumping it away to get the heat off. That can be used for power densities that are an order of magnitude higher than a traditional data center. But really, as we expand into what's needed in the future, we're looking more toward immersion cooling, where the whole system is immersed in a liquid, which essentially boils away and recondenses. That's very much more in its infancy here, but we are seeing a lot of innovation and investment in that area.
So, that old saying, some like it hot, does not apply to data centers. They like it at that optimal temperature in sort of the low 70 degrees range. All of this increase in power demand is also putting a lot of pressure on the nation's electrical grid. And that grid itself probably is in need of upgrading. So what upgrades are needed for the grid, and how long is that going to take?
It's a very good question. This is absolutely a constraint. When we look at the type of consumption of electricity that will be needed for data centers, this is growing at somewhere around a 10% annual rate through 2028. The AI component of that is probably growing at 3 times that rate. We had a company that participates in the power generation and grid side recently say that the amount of electricity that will be needed for just US data centers is on par with the current consumption of a Sweden or a Germany. So tremendous need here. It's not just that aspect. We need software to orchestrate the power distribution through the grid, getting increasingly more complex now that we have renewables feeding energy back into the grid. We need to distribute that power. It needs to be stored, and these data centers need tremendous backup. So all of those, are really a continued pull on the demand function for electrical equipment. And, frankly, lead times right now are very long. If you're trying to get a transformer, which is one of the first things that's established at one of these sites, if you put in that order today, you're likely waiting 2 to 3 years to get that equipment. And so that's really lengthening the duration of this demand wave and smoothing it out. It really means there's a lot of runway ahead for all the participants, and that's lend itself to very good pricing power, but also a lot of visibility from that backlog to future revenues in coming years.
So it seems like it's going to be a while for our electrical grid to catch up with the demand. So we've talked a lot about how industrial companies are helping the build out of AI for foundation. But I would also imagine that some of these companies are incorporating AI technology into their business and their daily operations. Can you give us a couple of use cases on that?
Definitely. So, industrial companies have been using AI in various forms for many, many years. Really, they were delivering equipment with sensors all over them, generating reams of data before anyone really knew what to do with it. And now we're developing some of these use cases. But, the prior iterations of AI have been used for things like digital twins, where you're operating equipment in a virtual environment that's mimicking how the equipment is being used in the field. And that can lend itself to things like predictive maintenance, where you can see that a part is going to fail in advance. You can send a service team out there. They can replace the part without any downtime on the customer side, which obviously saves a lot of money. And it's been used here and there in product design. With the advent of generative AI, I would say that there's probably not a huge use case on the revenue side, but productivity is definitely within scope. So we've heard that it can often be used for things like coding and software. If you can speed up that process, then you can remove a lot of the labor hours there. Really streamlining a lot of the back office and paperwork. That can be done pretty easily. And helping customer service representatives and sales representatives better facilitate those relationships. So, there should be, for the early adopters, a pretty quick productivity boost. Perhaps it gets competed away over time through price, but in the near term, that's pretty exciting. And when we talk to some of those early adopters, they say they're already saving millions to tens of millions of dollars on some of these solutions.
Thank you so much for that, Nathaniel, and for the insights and really helping us peel back yet another layer to the AI revolution. It's an investment theme that we really think will last through at least a decade. And thank you, our viewers, for watching. For more information, visit www.ubs.com/views. Make sure to follow UBS on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our Instagram channel at UBS Trending for UBS studio content that you can't find anywhere else. And as always, if you have any questions about your portfolio, please speak with your financial advisors. Until next time, I am Nadia Lovell, filling in for Anthony. Have a great rest of your day, and remember to keep your eyes on what's trending.